Welcome to Lead Poison.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Lead Poison podcast, brought to you by youcanpaint.com.au. Please head to youcanpaint.com.au for issue 1 of their how-to series, How to Paint Your House and Save Thousands. My name is Jack, your host, and today on the show we are joined by founder and executive producer of the Australian Television and Media Group, Richard Attieh. In 1990, Richard began his career in film and television at Channel 10 and SBS, and has since gone on to work in most major TV networks, as well as experience in radio and print media across Australia. Richard and the Australian TV and Media Group will be releasing a documentary on the life and ever-evolving legacy of Arthur Stace. These days, Arthur Stace is known as the man behind over 500,000 chalk inscriptions, dusted across the streets of Sydney from 1932 up until his death in 1967. Sydney-siders, men, women and children alike, would scurry past the word eternity, some of them endlessly curious as to who and why this word would appear, seemingly out of thin air, only to disappear amidst the hustle and bustle of a city that had been through so much, yet still had so far to go. On what seemed a normal night in 1932, Arthur Stace walked out onto the streets of Sydney, with the words of Reverend John Ridley echoing in his mind, bent down and wrote the word eternity in yellow chalk for the very first time. 68 years and over 500,000 instances later, that word among 5 tons of fireworks was beamed to millions around the world during the 2000 New Year's Eve celebrations. Since then, the eternity story continues to permeate the culture of not only Sydney, but Australia and the world. The eternity film will shed new light on this powerful story and give us further insight into the man some call the godfather of graffiti. Richard's documentary is due for release this year. Please visit www.eternityfilm.com.au and join the mailing list for more information and updates. Please also leave a rating on whatever platform you're using, and of course, I hope you enjoy the discussion. I'd like to start just by talking about your history and how you sort of got into film and television. You're a producer, director, the founder and executive director of the Australian Television and Media Group. Now, those words, producer and director, I've heard for obviously many years. Everyone knows those words, but I don't actually know exactly what they mean. Can you explain what role a producer plays and what role a director plays in film and television?
In the context of film and television, the producer is the person who comes up with the idea or works with the creative people who come up with the ideas and work out how to raise the money, how to employ the right people, how to get the story out into the theatres or onto TV or onto phones or, to the audience. So the producer is the person who does the business. The director is the person who does the creative. And so that's the person who basically works on the angles of the stories they want to tell. They work out who the best people to interview, the type of questions to ask the different people. And then through the director doing what he or she does, which is coming up with the creative way of telling the story, the producer's normally in the background pulling their hair out, trying to work out how we can afford to do this and how we can find the audience and how to get a TV channel or a distributor interested in what we're doing before the thing's even done. So that's how the two work together.
Right. So I imagine traditionally they would be 2 separate roles for 2 different people. Does it ever cross over where one person has to look after both roles?
Yeah, quite often. In the world of independent cinema or independent productions, you've got people who tend to do 2 or 3 roles. So in the context of the Eternity film, I'm the executive producer and a director, which means I'm taking on a fair whack of that. And so what that means, the executive producer that's the people who look after the money, right? We got to get the money in. We then employ the producer who then goes and makes the business happen. And the executive producer and the producer normally employ the director, who then goes and then they go and employ everybody else. And so that's generally how it works. But yeah, you do get people who wear multiple hats on projects, depending on what the project is and the level of passion, right? So generally speaking, the more passionate we are about a project, the more hands-on we are, and the more we'll do 2 or 3 roles.
Interesting. Sounds like it could be, a big workload for someone to wear those multiple hats. But I guess I'm assuming people in that industry are quite industrious and the type of place a problem solver would find themselves.
TV and film, honestly, it's all about problem solving. Years ago, I was working in London, and one of the most experienced lighting guys I've ever worked with says, TV is easy. It's all about logistics and problem solving. If you can just have, you just get a timeline and have people just follow the timeline and solve problems as they come up, you make television. And I thought, wow, that actually changed the way I approach production. But yeah, it's all about problem solving, thinking on your feet. And it's like with any artist who's out there, you go with the grand plan of what you want the final product to be. But as you go and start executing your artwork, things change along the way, and you got to adapt. And the skill really is being able to adapt with the content or the new ideas that come up, things that come up that you might not have thought of at the beginning. And you think, this is really going to add something different. I want to pursue this angle a little bit more. So, yeah, I mean, it's great fun. It's all problem solving. It's all creative. And ultimately, it's all about creating an experience or creating an impression on the end user, the viewer of what we're working on.
Yeah, interesting, man. It sounds stressful, but it sounds fun. Has filmmaking always been a passion of yours? Can you tell me when you found your interest and what initially drew you in? Was it a childhood endeavor or childhood interest?
No, I used to want to be a lawyer when I was younger, growing up, and then I went to university and I started studying law, and I sort of did like a law and an arts degree combined, and then I realised that I didn't really enjoy learning about torts and all these things from 500 years ago in England that somehow influenced the way we do things in Australia today. And I really took to journalism and the whole media production side of the degree. And then as that journalism degree, as things went on, I sort of found myself in journalism, did some stuff at Channel News and SBS, and realised that I didn't really care too much about daily news. And then the progression from there was to then work on TV, something that wasn't going to be all about a 90-second news package at the end of the day, but something that was going to have the ability to create a splash, to create an emotional experience for someone. They watch the show, they watch the movie, the documentary, whatever it is, and then somewhere in their DNA they get rewired. Something makes an impact on them. There's some type of an emotional experience that says, hey, I never thought about that particular topic from that angle before. I might change the way I think or just change the way I approach certain issues. So that's how I got into it.
So you sort of mentioned a journalism degree. What kind of formal training have you been through to get to the position you are today? Was it forgive me, I don't really know the terms, but a journalism degree, and I'm assuming you've done some other stuff with media?
Yeah, I did a Bachelor of Arts degree with a double major in communications at Western Sydney University. And then while I was doing that, I structured my degree and I went part-time for the last year, and I did work placements at WSFM in radio, Channel 10 in news, SBS in radio and TV, 2GB, I think, or 2UE, one of those stations, just a whole bunch of places. I just went out there, a couple of local newspapers as well. And then towards the end of my degree, I ended up getting a job working at the Sydney Morning Herald and Sun Herald newspapers as a copy boy. And that was where I learned how the media industry ticked, just learned how things just worked, and what role the chief of staff plays, and in newspaper world, the chief of staff and then the news producers and all those, journos and what have you. I learned how all that worked. And when I went over to TV, it was sort of similar roles, but different skill sets. And I just loved this whole idea of, doing something that 500,000 people saw on TV that night. And then as I went on, the formal training for TV, news, journalism from the University of Western degree, then all those work placements. So by the time I graduated, I had worked in the industry for 2 years, all at junior levels, and had a Bachelor of Arts behind me as well.
That sounds like you've sort of jumped straight into the deep end from the beginning, really. I wanted to ask you, how has the media industry changed since your career began in, I'm assuming, the early 90s? Have you seen any massive paradigm shifts in terms of the media industry itself? I assume the internet has played a large role over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, absolutely. The change has been massive on a number of levels. Storytelling has totally changed. The tools that we use have totally changed, and the expectations of the audience, right? So, like when I started, we were still running around with 8mm video cassettes, right, and putting those into cameras, and then literally ejecting the tape and going into the edit suite, and you'd have to copy it off, and then you'd always work on the backup, not the original, and and it was sort of like super special to have the original master tape that we recorded on and so on. Whereas now it's all digital, right? And so you record in 4K. Back then video 8 was like you don't even consider it now, but now if you're not shooting 4K, you're sort of not in the game. So the technology's changed, and obviously the way the edit suites work, a lot of it's non-linear. Now you can edit on your phone and your laptop, whatever. Back in the day, it used to be a $30,000 or $40,000 edit suite, and so that's all changed. And the way we tell stories now, they're a lot more cutting edge, a lot edgier. Some of the big films from the 90s and the 2000s, like Tarantino, some of the stuff that the Coen brothers worked on just changed the way people expect stories to be told. And so, and stories now are a lot shorter. I remember when I was first starting, one of the senior journos at Channel 10 said to me, look, we have to produce a 90-second story every day, but really what we want to tell is a 3-minute story in 90 seconds so it doesn't get boring. And so now, when you sort of go to the TV channels, you still have to work in half-hour or 1-hour blocks to time and what have you. But when we're putting stuff on the internet and doing stuff like in podcasts, time doesn't really matter. The most important thing is the story, and the story's got to be interesting, right? And then when you go to a TV channel and they say, oh, we need 59 minutes on the dot, and you go, yeah, but my story's really good and it goes 1 hour and 6 minutes and 30 seconds, then you're just going to take stuff out. It can diminish the story a bit, right? But we did something for Snapchat docos for this production company in Canada the other day, and that was all about a 5-minute video, really a 5-minute documentary about animal welfare across Australia. Snapchat documentaries, go and pitch that to ABC. They sort of go, what are you talking about? With Snapchat docos, those can go from 3.5 minutes right through to 10 minutes if they have to. So the biggest thing that's changed with the internet is that the stories just need to be super, super good, super cool, really engaging, and they just have to capture the audience and keep the audience.
How do you feel about, obviously I imagine the technological changes in the industry you would welcome with open arms, but what about all the other changes? How do you feel about them? Is it frustrating, sort of maybe the lack of attention span people might have in terms of traditional media? Does it change the way you feel about the industry, or are you just sort of adapting as it comes along?
Mate, well, we're always adapting, always making things work out, trying to work out what's going to come next, what's around the corner that we haven't sort of thought of yet. Mate, I love it, this whole idea of change. We've got a bunch of young people who come through our doors at the TV group, and they've just got ideas and types of stories they want to tell that just blow my mind, right? Stuff that I haven't thought of. I might be, a generation ahead of where a lot of these younger people are, and what I can bring to the table and what I'm starting to do now is to equip these guys to tell the stories that they want to tell, because the stories that I sort of think of, tend to work on TV, or they might be more long form, and these guys are challenging me saying, hey, is that really a half-hour documentary, or is it a 5-minute social media video, and is it going to get a bigger audience there? So I love it, mate. I love the challenge. I love the diversity. I love the range of stories. And mate, our door is always open for people to come in with brand new ideas and say, hey, we want to do like a web series of 10 2.5-minute videos. And I would have thought, what? I mean, who's going to watch that? But there's an audience out there.
I mean, would you agree that traditional media would sort of be? I mean, it's beginning to be. Well, I don't know if it's even beginning. It's probably already well established that the audience actually exists sort of in the online world as opposed to traditional media.
Yeah, totally. You just got to look at what are the traditional media outlets are doing. So if you sort of look at what's happening on a massive level, Channel 10 in Australia, which is co-owned by Paramount and CBS in the US, they
Really,
now
I
are
didn't know
starting.
that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so if you look at what Channel 10 is starting to do, a lot of their stuff, they're starting to promote it online, and they're starting to push Paramount TV, right? You look at Channel 9 and they're really starting to push Stan, right? And so if you're on TV, like linear, traditional sort of television, and to a degree, if you're in sort of the traditional cinema, what tends to happen is you have to have an online presence or you have to have the digital rights sorted as well. Because that's where a lot of the audience is, right? And so, the amount of emails and stuff I receive about 7, then 7 plus, or 9 and 9 now, and 10 and then 10 play. And so these are, in Australia, they're the big free-to-air commercial networks. And, they're really starting to ramp up their online offerings as well. You can watch more stuff on Channel 9 now, as in 9 now online, as opposed to Channel 9. And depending on who you are and different people have got different opinions, there's more interesting content online on 9 now or on 10 play or 7 plus or, ABC, iView or whatever. There's a lot more content there, potentially engaging. So from these channels, these media outlets, the online world gives them an opportunity to attract a bigger audience and build a much more loyal following. And that's the new way. I mean, outside of sport and news, when's the last time you watched free-to-air TV?
Yeah, it's certainly not on very often in my house. Yeah, and basically just for the reasons that you said, you can just get so much more from other outlets online. I find occasionally I put the telly on and just have a look what's on, and yeah, it's interesting how much it's changed. Has the employment opportunities in the industry changed with that shift? I mean, is there? I imagine there's people that hold cameras and fold up cords and entry-level positions. Is that all changing as well, the amount of people that's required shifting into the online space?
Yeah, you sort of get two worlds. One world, which is like traditional TV, where it's done properly, in inverted commas, done properly. And the opportunities to get in there are a lot harder because it's a diminishing market, right? The demand just isn't as much. On the other side of the equation, a lot of people are doing it as hobbies now. So there's a lot of hobbyists, a lot of sort of amateur storytellers out there, which make my life interesting, a little bit different, a bit more challenging. Because what we got to do is turn around and find out how to make a living doing this stuff, right? And so when we do the higher end documentaries or sort of traditional sort of TV, linear TV stuff, you got to play the game of traditional broadcast, but you also got to be mindful of online standards, right? So we've got this one series that we've been doing now. Just want to say there is a place for traditional linear free-to-air TV. That's not going to go away anytime soon, and that's still how the media industry is measured, right? So if someone wants to see what's the most popular program on television at the moment, what they do is they go and check out the ratings on 7, 9, 10, ABC, SBS, Foxtel. That's just what they do, right? We're not quite at the point where, to a degree, look at Stan and Netflix and what have you, but they're not sort of quite all in the one right at the minute, right? And the advertising money is really following what the free-to-air broadcasters are doing. So that's still the primary driver for the way the business ticks. So there's always a place for that. And for some of our clients, we do programs for free-to-air TV, and those programs just won't work anywhere else. They won't work online. They won't find an audience. It just won't work. But on free-to-air, it will find an audience, and it'll find a diverse audience, and it really gives different people an opportunity to tell their stories in different ways. However, in the online space, when we've got a niche product or perhaps a more targeted program that it's not for broadcast, it's for people who are of a particular interest, or they like a particular angle, or they're into sport or whatever, it's a lot easier to find that audience, build that relationship that you need, and then go on a journey with them over 3 or 4 years or episodes or programs or whatever it is.
Yeah, wow. That's really good insights. I didn't really think about a lot of that. Can you tell me about the Australian Television and Media Group, when you founded it, and sort of what led to you starting the company?
Yeah, well, we started the Australian Television and Media Group a handful of years ago because we wanted to tell Australian stories that worked for Australian and international audiences, right? And so for a long time, I've worked on stories for various production companies that were for just overseas or just for Australia. And we've got just a great group of people who we work with who range from everything from live events, Olympics since the year 2000 and Millennium Fireworks and all that, through to some big brand TV shows, like Survivor and Big Brother and what have you, right through to people who've done a lot of independent documentary work. And what we found was there's a hole in the market, or there's a place where we can tell some great stories based on Australia, Australian history, our personalities, our diversity, our Indigenous background, our multicultural background, the whole shebang that works overseas. And so what we want to do is focus on telling stories that we think will work in Australia, but also resonate overseas. So that's what we do, and that's how we go about what we're doing.
I think there's definitely a place for that type of film work. Are documentaries, does it, and you'll have to forgive my ignorance, but does the TV Media Group, do you still work on traditional TV as well, as in free-to-air programs and documentaries like the one that we're going to be talking about today? Do you do a whole range of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's television and media, right? So we do TV. We also will do audio. We also will do print materials and also online content as well, right? So it's the whole shebang.
Documentaries, are they a particular interest of yours? Are they something that you sort of lean towards, or do you, when you're working on a project, do you have a preference of what it is? Obviously, aside from financial, the financial aspect of it, just out of your own interest, what type of media do you particularly like working with?
Yeah, I love telling factual stories. So documentaries are my thing. That's my biggest strength. Mind you, when I worked in the UK, I was doing game shows. So game shows were my thing back then. And then when I came to Australia, interactive TV was my thing. But the thing that always kept me going was factual storytelling. So I love telling documentaries. I love telling stories about people and places and things that make you think, right? And so when we come up with an idea for a show, whether it's a history thing, and there might be a bit of dramatization, or there might be a bit of acting, or whatever it is, whatever the story needs to be told, I always come back to the factual storytelling angle, and then generally speaking, the documentary side. That's just what I enjoy doing. But other people in our group love doing other things. So over the coming years, it'll be quite diverse, and we'll branch out. But right at the minute, we're focusing on factual storytelling. The business model is a bit easier than telling drama type stories, but we'll get there.
How many people are involved with the group? How big's your team?
Our core group at the Australian Television and Media Group is 6 people. Then we've got a bunch of freelancers and contractors who we pull in depending on whatever the project is. So, we were doing something the other day, as I said, some Snapchat original for this Canadian production company, and that was being filmed on the Central Coast. So I pulled in someone who's a run and gun documentary type camera person, and he was the right fit for the job. I wouldn't consider, everyone to be part of the inner sanctum of our group, but as needed, you pull the right people in and go from there.
So I guess that kind of sets the scene. The reason I wanted to chat to you today is because you, along with the team at the TV Media Group, are releasing a documentary, and it's about the life of Arthur Stace. Now, a lot of Australians and a lot of people listening will know the name Arthur Stace, and they'll know the word eternity. But for those that don't, can you tell me a little bit about Arthur Stace and a little bit about why you decided to tell his story?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, the eternity story is one that seems to resonate with a range of people in Australia and around the world, for that matter. Most people know the eternity story, or their exposure to the eternity story was at the Sydney Millennium Fireworks. It was 22 years ago now, so it's not as if it was recent. There's a whole raft of people who just weren't born in the year 2000. But that was when the word eternity seemed to hit its pinnacle. It was on the Harbour Bridge after the Millennium Fireworks. It was then in the opening ceremony of the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. And so there's a whole generation of people who were alive at the time who just know the word eternity because of those two massive exposures. And it was also when the eyes of the world were on Sydney, all right? So for whatever reason, at the turn of the millennium, A lot of people were saying Sydney is the first major international city that's going to have the fireworks. And then there's the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. And so the eyes of the world were watching. And at these two massive events, the organisers decided to use the word eternity. And so that's where most people know about it. But the eternity story goes back to 1932 in Sydney, where this fella called Arthur Stace goes to the Burton Street Tabernacle Church, which is now the Eternity Playhouse Theatre in Darlinghurst. And here's this fella called John Ridley talk about the echoes of eternity. And as a result of that, Arthur Stace walks out from that church service and starts writing Eternity on the Street, and did it for something like 24, 25 years, and no one knew who he was. And then for the last sort of 9 or 10 years, people know who Arthur Stace is as Mr. Eternity, and he's writing Eternity everywhere. So he's said to have written Eternity on the Streets something like 500,000 times over 35 years across Sydney. Some people say he went to Melbourne, some people Newcastle, Wollongong, what have you, but generally speaking in the Sydney and the CBD precinct. So generally, like as a general thing, that's the Eternity story in a nutshell. There was this fella called Arthur Stace who was a World War I veteran. He was a ward of the state. He wasn't all that well educated. Some people say he was illiterate, but he could read and write. I've seen letters that he's written to people. But generally speaking, he went around. His life was totally transformed by the Christian faith, and he used eternity as a way to express his faith to the city that he lives in. And so he did that by writing Eternity on the Street 500,000 times. And, one thing leads to another throughout the 30s, 40s and 50s. This thing gets picked up in the newspaper. The Eternity story gets picked up in the newspapers to the point where, a multi-award winning documentary gets made in the 1990s. And then in the year 2000, it goes on the bridge. So generally speaking, that's the story.
Yeah, it's incredible. Just speaking of the bridge celebrations at the end of 1999, to think that the word eternity was on the bridge. And I was considering it earlier this morning. When Arthur was sort of hanging around the streets of Sydney, that bridge would have just been being sort of completed around that time. And, obviously he would have never thought that what he was doing would end up on that very bridge that was being completed. I think it was in the early 30s as well. It's amazing.
It was actually on the same year. So if you look at the timeline of Sydney's history, Arthur first writes Eternity on the Street on the 14th of November in 1932 in Darlinghurst, and the Sydney Harbour Bridge also opened in 1932. And so we look at that in our documentary. We reference that a few times, and we also speak with Ignatius Jones, who was the creative director of the Sydney Millennium Fireworks in the year 2000, and he's the guy who came up with the idea, or who really championed the idea of putting Eternity on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And he makes a comment which is, wow, imagine Arthur first writing Eternity on the streets in the same year that the Harbour Bridge opens. I reckon he would have written Eternity on the bridge that year as well. And it's really a cool moment in the documentary. It's one of my favourite parts.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about. I mean, it would be amazing to have some sort of time machine and go back and talk to Arthur and tell him, what had happened with his word. It's incredible.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. And there's so many other little things that we'll explore in the documentary about, little coincidences where something happened in 1932 and then it happened in 1940s or 50s or what have you, and Eternity was around, and then, years later, the two stories collide again. It's just amazing, So for example, in 1932, the ABC launched in Australia as well, right? And that was the year Eternity was first written. And so when you look at the 1994 Eternity documentary in Australia, that aired on the ABC, right? And you sort of go, well, so, it's more than just a coincidence, right? Where in 1932, the ABC launches and Arthur first starts writing Eternity. And then in 1994... So, 60 years later or 58 years later, whatever it is, the ABC go and commission a documentary about the word eternity. It's cool. And a handful of years after that, the bridge, which opened the same year Arthur writes Eternity on the Street, ends up celebrating the word across the bridge. Just amazing. Those little things happen all the time.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I guess it kind of speaks to the power of faith, really, because, a lot of people might say that coincidence and things, but Arthur's whole message was around faith, and he sort of turned his life around with that word, or that that was at the same period. He turned his life around. He started to write the word around the streets of Sydney. And all these little coincidences, it's interesting to think that sort of the power of faith has something to do with that.
Yeah, I think so. I think there was something divine that was happening in Arthur's life. And certainly his intention for writing Eternity was certainly motivated by his Christian faith. And that's why that's why he did it, really. He saw himself as, he saw that writing Eternity as an expression of his mission, his purpose for being. And so that's what he did. And he did it faithfully, and he did it for so long that the story became bigger than him, and it became bigger than just one 8-letter word, right? It became something that somehow managed to just capture the interest of Sydney and Australia, right? And so if you think of the time when Arthur was writing Eternity and all the stuff that happened in the early to mid 1900s, right? There was the end of the Depression. It was in between World War I and World War II. There was World War II. Then there was all the Korean War and all the other things, Vietnamese War, all the other things that happened. All these bad news stories were just happening for so many years throughout the 1900s. And then amidst all that, there is this story of intrigue of eternity being written on the streets. And there was this whole generation of people who grew up, and it was just normal, right? So it's like for us today, how we just go, oh, it's just normal. Everyone's got Facebook, or we use Facebook, or Instagram is normal, or you flick the radio on and it's just normal, or whatever we consider to be normal part of everyday life. You wake up and there's your phone or whatever. Well, back then, if you were traveling into the city, it was just normal to see Eternity written on the street. And it wasn't until that stopped happening that all of a sudden people started missing it, and this is after Arthur passed away, and all these other people just started incorporating into what they were doing. But anyway, throughout the 1930s and 40s, it just started happening. And then in the 40s and 50s in particular, the newspapers were telling the story of they were trying to work out, who is this Eternity person? Where is it coming from? Why is it happening? In the documentary, we speak with a guy called Roy Williams, who is Australia's leading commentator on the Arthur Stace Eternity story. And he's got this wonderful line where he says, throughout the 1940s and 50s, the newspapers were they were weaving the Eternity story into the fabric of our city. Wow. And it's just wonderful when you sort of think about this, where because Eternity was just everywhere, it was normal. We've got this other fella who's a Sydney historian. He says Eternity was like a bat signal. You sort of knew it was there. It was written on the ground instead of in the sky, but it was like the bat signal, and you knew that Mr. Eternity, or Batman, had been there because he left his mark behind, And it became something that just became normal for a whole bunch of people. And so when people would start visiting from outside of Sydney, they would be looking for the Eternity symbol somewhere, and then they would find it. And there's like, and then they would read about the Eternity Man or Mr. Eternity. And then the whole myth and the legend just grew from there, to the point where a whole bunch of artists and poets and musicians and just a whole bunch of different people started incorporating Eternity, or the message of Eternity, or the Mr. Eternity story into their creative artworks. And that then went on to start influencing culture as we know it today.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. And I think the word eternity is, it's not a question, but it's almost a question. I guess it comes in the sermon. I think it's sort of phrased as a question, but it makes you think. It's not just a phrase that you read, it's sort of a full stop at the end. It makes you think about yourself in a lot of ways. And I think that has something to do with the power of its longevity. It almost needs a question mark behind it. Like, it makes you think about yourself. Is there anything about Arthur Stace that you learnt through the film that you didn't know beforehand, or that hadn't previously been in the 1994 documentary, or anything surprising about his life or what he did back in the 1930s?
We talked about documentary storytelling. One of the reasons why I love documentary storytelling is because I learned so much about the stories, about history, and through that I learned about myself as well, right? And so just learning to place myself in the context of stories to be able to go and tell them. And so one of the things I've learned about Arthur Stace, which I knew but didn't really appreciate, was just the man's steadfast commitment to what he felt his mission was, right? And in the 1930s and 40s, there was a whole generation of people, and Arthur Stace was one of these people who were just battered and bruised from the late 1800s, and just the way society was in the early 1900s and the 1910s, leading up to World War One. There's a whole bunch of people who were just battered and bruised from just the rough lifestyles and just the way Australia was developing in the early 1900s. And so by the time people like Arthur Stace were teenagers, World War One was upon them, and it sort of made sense to going to war, believe it or not, was a way of escaping the difficulties of life that they had back home. And so for a lot of these young people who went off to become Anzacs and war veterans, many of them were just looking for another place to just get away from the hardships at home. And that was definitely Arthur's story. I didn't really know that. The guy comes back, and now we talk about depression and PTSD and stress and all that stuff. Well, Arthur Stace was one of these people who came back from World War One, and he was a shell-shocked guy, right? Like, this was depression in overdrive, post-traumatic stress in overdrive, and it was across a whole generation of men in Australia, and it was not diagnosed, right? And so Arthur Stace was one of these people who came back and really had nowhere to go. He came back from war, not really knowing who he was, like seeing the atrocities of World War One, being a shell-shocked man and having nowhere to go. So he turns back to the streets, right, to where he came from. He went back to where he came from, and it sort of came back, and it was worse for him because not only did he have nowhere to go, he was not that well educated, couldn't really hold a job, he was an alcoholic, all this stuff, but now he had massive depression holding him back as well. That was the biggest thing. It just sort of really helped me to appreciate what the people who lived through the 1920s, 30s, and 40s must have experienced.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And it's interesting. I mean, it's not that long ago, really, in the grand scheme of things, but just the amount that the world has changed since then is really hard to comprehend. Do you know when his identity was revealed and how it was revealed 25 years after he started writing Eternity?
Yeah, the revealing of the Mr. Eternity identity, the myth, when the myth was sort of busted. We talk about that in the documentary. And Arthur Stace used to go to the Burton Street Baptist Tabernacle, which is now the Eternity Playhouse Theatre. And in our documentary, we speak with the daughter of the minister. And it turns out that Arthur was really good friends with the minister there. Lyle Thompson was his name. And so one day after church, these two fellas, Arthur and Lyle, they jump in the gospel wagon that this church had, and they went to Redfern. And what they would do is give out food and water and drinks and what have you to people who needed it around Redfern. And so as the story goes, and this lady called Elizabeth tells the story in the doco, Arthur then sort of breaks away from his mate and just goes to some alleyway and starts writing Eternity on the street. And he didn't know that Lyle was following him. And so Arthur had just written Eternity. He stands up, and there's Lyle looking at him and says, "Arthur, are you Mr. Eternity?" And then he says, "Guilty as charged, Your Honour." And we talk about this in the doco, and you've got to watch it because it's just a great moment. Anyway, and so then he says, Arthur says, "Guilty as charged, Your Honour, but you're not going to tell anyone, are you? I need to be anonymous." And so out of respect for their friendship, Lyle doesn't tell anyone, not even his children, his family, his congregation, nobody, about Arthur Stace being Mr. Eternity, right? However, a few years on, Lyle is pretty ill and he's in hospital. Some people say he's on his deathbed. And Arthur comes in to visit him. And so as part of his dying wish, he says to Arthur, "Can you please go public with the Mr. Eternity story, because so many people are going to be encouraged by it." So Arthur grants this dying wish to his friend and says, "I will go public with the Mr. Eternity story." And so he does. And that's how the story gets out there, right? So it's just this beautiful, beautiful story of rags, not quite to riches. Arthur was never really rich, but from nothing to something, or from hopeless to now being hopeful, to this strong friendship of loyalty, to this thing of honoring a friend, respecting somebody's anonymity, to the point where honoring someone's dying wish, and then putting the story out there for them people to then interpret and take on however they want to. That's how the whole thing comes out. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I guess it's it speaks to the power of these tiny little moments that can, at the time, they're just small moments, a friend's wish, a piece of chalk and a sidewalk, the original sermon, it's just, I can imagine that no one would have ever thought that these tiny little moments would lead to what has become of the Eternity story. And I guess, I'm very glad and appreciative that he did end up coming public, because if he hadn't, I guess he would have just been, remained in obscurity for the rest of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Eternity story would have died with Arthur, passing away. But the whole idea of him coming out is really been an interesting one, because it sort of changed the narrative of the Eternity story and the meaning of eternity in many ways, right? So just sort of backtrack and you go, where did the Eternity story start, right? Because as a documentary storyteller, as I guess with any artist who's out there, when you're trying to tell a story, you've got to go back to when it actually started. Where did the nucleus of the idea come from? So with Eternity, the place that the story that we know today actually started, and we don't delve into this so much in the doco, we do talk about it or refer to it, but it actually started with this guy called John Ridley, who was the minister, sitting down at his desk or at his table or wherever he used to write his sermons, writing about eternity. That's where it actually started. And then some months later, he then goes and shares that sermon, and Arthur picks it up, and then he writes it on the street. So the story actually started with this one minister sitting down in his quiet place, like many artists do now, sit down in their quiet place and just brainstorm or think of ideas or what have you. That's where it actually, the germ, the nucleus of the idea was there. It then went on and got picked up by Arthur, and then went on and got picked up by the newspapers and picked up, and it just went on from there. So that's when you sort of think about the entirety of the Eternity story. And I mean, I'm so grateful that John Ridley wrote the sermon and gave the sermon, that Arthur Stace picked it up. And then looking over the years, that the newspapers all told the story. Someone like Martin Sharp, who's a classic Sydney or Australian artist, he starts incorporating eternity into his artworks. That gets then picked up. A guy called Remo opens this artistic store in Darlinghurst called the Remo General Store. He does this massive eternity painting, sticks it on his front window, sells like thousands and thousands of T-shirts with eternity written on there. Then the guys who do the Eternity 94 documentary come along, and then Ignatius Jones comes along, puts it on the bridge, and then Rick Birch then puts it into the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. And you look at that narrative, right? And it just goes on. And I'm so grateful for the whole thing, because, the way this thing came about for me, I was sitting at a screen producers conference in Victoria a few years ago. And I was one of those people who, people pitch ideas to me, and I give feedback on ideas and what have you. And this lady was pitching this idea to me, and I can't even remember what her idea. It was a good idea, but I remember thinking, there's no reason to tell that story today. You can tell that story 10 years ago. You can tell it in 10 years' time. And so I just, while she was talking to me, my mind just went wandering, and I was like, what story is there out there that I reckon I could tell, do a pretty good job, that needs to be told now? And looking at the Eternity story, it was like 20, 25 years since it was on the Harbour Bridge. So there's a bit of an anniversary there. I reckon I could tell that story. And so that's how it came about. Now, I then came back to my office after that documentary and had a message on my answering machine from this lady who had just written a book about Arthur Stace, Mr. Eternity. And she's like, and I still got it. I haven't deleted it off the answering machine, because it was a bit of a significant moment for me and for our office. Anyway, she says, Richard, this is Elizabeth. Someone's given me your name. I want to make a documentary about Arthur Stace and eternity. Can you please call me? And it leaves the number and then hangs up. And I sat there, and she left the message at 12:33 on that same day that I was listening to that pitch, right? That pitching session started at 12:30. So I'm wondering if there was if Arthur Stace was sitting there turning the whatever he does, somehow going, you, Elizabeth, call Richard at the time when I'm going to put that message in his head. It was just cool. It was just one of those things that just really okay, I think the world is telling me to do something with this story.
Well, it's another one of those coincidences, isn't it, with this story that, and I guess in a way the baton's been handed on to you, or you've taken the baton upon yourself. And, I'm really looking forward to the film. I am interested though. Have you, Arthur Stace wrote his scripts or whatever you call them, the word eternity on the streets of Sydney and the surrounds in chalk. So obviously, they didn't last, which is quite incredible because he did so many of them and there's only a few left. Have you seen any of the original artworks in situ, or I know there's one in a museum somewhere? Have you come across any of them yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. We've seen so many original materials, artifacts with eternity written on there. The coolest one that I've seen was eternity written in Arthur Stace's Bible, right? So I didn't know, but Arthur Stace loved going to church. Like I knew he was a church man. I didn't know he loved it so much. And so in his Bible, he had all of his favorite hymns, right, on one end. And at the back of it, someone asked him to write eternity. So he did. And so that was really cool. And then I've seen just other people's Bibles or other people's, papers or what have you, where it's got an original eternity that Arthur wrote on it. There's a few things that are out there that are in various museums around the traps that's got an original eternity, original Arthur Stace eternity on it as well. There's one inside the GPO Tower Bell at Martin Place in Sydney. Now, I've gone and I've seen that. In our documentary, we do ask if that's an original, because it's sort of it's not in keeping with the way Arthur would have done eternity. He did it in public places where it wasn't meant to last forever, whereas now it exists here. It's a bit protected. It's not quite, it doesn't sort of fit the whole Arthur Stace motif of writing eternity. But to answer your question, yes, we have seen a handful of original eternities, and a couple of them will feature in our documentary.
Yeah, interesting. Did the one in the bell tower at the post office in, I think it's in Martin Place, isn't it?
Yeah, Martin Place in Sydney.
I mean, was it in the traditional copper plate? Did it look like it should?
It did, yeah, it did. I mean, it looked like an original Arthur Stace eternity. So the only reason why I question it is because it's not in keeping with the way Arthur did it, which is in public for people to see, right? Now, that said, Roy Williams, again, who's the expert, he's the eternity expert in Australia, he doesn't question it, right? He's seen it and he reckons it's an Arthur Stace original. Now, the whole idea of that particular eternity came out in the 1994 documentary film, right? Now, before that, it wasn't really known, or it wasn't publicly known. So I don't know if that's an Arthur Stace original or if somebody wrote it, but either way, it's there. It's said to be an Arthur Stace original, and it's pretty cool, So each time, when you're in Sydney and each time that tower bell, each time the GPO bell sounds, you got to know there's an eternity up there that's ringing. So it's pretty cool.
So I wanted to ask you about something, and again, I'm not sure if it's something that you know about, and it only came up briefly. I think it might have even been in the 1994 documentary, but it was this idea of open air meetings they used to have in Sydney and I guess across Australia, where I'm assuming people would congregate and potentially speak about faith, but also just talk and discuss and sometimes even argue. Did you come across any of documentation of these open air meetings and what they were?
Yeah, the open air meetings was something that were quite common in the church scene in Australia in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, right? And so Arthur Stace was one of the people who would go and run or organise open air meetings for the Burton Street Baptist Church that he attended, right? And so it wasn't uncommon for Arthur to go into King's Cross or various parts of Darlinghurst or Redfern, Surrey Hills, wherever, and run an open air meeting or tell his story as part of the open air meetings, right? And so the open air meetings were an opportunity for the church community back then in the 1930s and 40s to connect with the community. And what they would often do was go and preach. They'd talk a bit about the Christian story, share their faith, invite people to come in and have a drink, food, whatever it is that they needed. But it was all about connection, right? And so these open air meetings were really how the church people would just remove the church walls, go into the community and be a presence. And Arthur Stace was a massive part of that in the Darlinghurst, Surrey Hills, inner Sydney area. And that's just what he did. And in our documentary, one of the ladies who we interview talks about Arthur Stace going and telling the people in the open air meetings that he was Mr. Eternity, but people just didn't connect the dots. They just didn't connect it, right? And so as a result, the whole eternity story was being told by Arthur in these open air meetings, But for whatever reason, it just didn't quite click until later on in the 1950s.
Yeah, I mean, and he was quite a shy and sort of reserved person, wasn't he, as well?
Yeah, Arthur is known to be someone who didn't really want to tell his story, but did it because he felt that it was part of his mission, and also part of his commitment to his friend, the dying wish. And so that's why Arthur did what he did, and the way he did it. But yeah, I'm told that he was a shy person. He preferred to not be in the limelight, preferred to be in the background, more like the supporting act as opposed to the headline act. And when you think about it, that makes sense with the whole idea of him writing eternity and not really wanting anyone to know who he was, you know. But one of the things that's really interesting, you look at someone like Arthur Stace, and we say he was shy and he did these open air meetings and he did all this public stuff, and then on the other hand, we say he didn't want to be known. Like someone was saying to me the other day that, and this, this was not on film. They were saying that Arthur is Australia's most prolific evangelist, right? And you sort of go, what do you mean by that? He goes, well, if you want someone to go and tell people about the faith or any faith, in Arthur Stace, the Christian faith, he did it more than anybody else. And he was the most effective one in all of Australian history. And I so much wish we had the cameras rolling, because it was just a great conversation. I wish we captured it. But anyway, so just thinking that through, you see, you got to ask the question, why? Why is it that we talk about Arthur now and the way he did? It's because he took what he did from his open air meeting days, from his writing eternity on the street days, no one knew about him, to becomes a bit of a public figure, a bit of a celebrity. And all along, he's writing eternity, and eternity then becomes part of Sydney's story, right? And so Arthur's version of eternity, which is all about the faith, encouraging people to look down and see eternity on the street, and then look up and consider their place in the context of, heaven and hell and life and death and all of that. And then somehow Arthur's message gets picked up and adopted into mainstream culture, right? And so today there's a whole swag of people who have written about eternity in their books. There's a bunch of artists, some of them who you've spoken to on your podcast, and I've really enjoyed those conversations, who have incorporated eternity into their artwork. And there's street artists, some people who are not part of the Christian faith, who are incorporating the eternity story into their messaging, and on it goes, right? People like Martin Sharp, who then go and influence just a whole new generation of people. People like Ignatius Jones puts it on the bridge, a whole new generation of people. Right now, there's 2 eternity coffee shops in Sydney, one at Central, one at Town Hall. And we speak to the guys at Town Hall and go, why did you call it Eternity? Why Eternity Cafe? And they take it right back to wanting to honour Arthur Stace and having an original Arthur Stace plaque, eternity plaque, at the Eternity Waterfall. And that's why you go there and it's all about Arthur Stace, and they really talk about how Arthur probably would have written eternity where this coffee shop is now, right next to Town Hall train station. It's really cool. And so you look at Arthur Stace, his work just continues today in art, in literature, in hospitality, things like cafes. You go to the museum, they're in galleries all across Australia. In Victoria, in the Melbourne Museum, there's an eternity tapestry that's hanging there. In Victoria, and this is supposed to be a Sydney story, you go to Canberra at the Australian National Museum, there was an eternity exhibition that ran for 17 years, all inspired by Arthur Stace. It's a massive story that just keeps being repackaged, redeveloped, retold, influencing people in a whole new way.
Yeah, and it seems like it's not going to stop anytime soon. I think your film is really going to remind people about the story and push it to a new place, man. It's really exciting. I'm looking forward to it, most definitely.
I hope so. We've got some really cool people. So in our film, we speak with Mystery, who I know you've spoken to, and Mystery and Days, one of Mystery's mates. They do a 21 meter high, like 5-story high eternity on Kent Street in Sydney. I remember filming that with my camera and looking up, and I was seeing particles of their spray cans coming down on the lens, thinking, this is going to wreck my lens. But it was just so cool. And it's just, you stand there and you sort of go, when you sort of think of eternity, you go, what's my place in eternity? You look at this 21 meter high painting, and it's like Arthur's tag. That's what they called it, right? And you sit there and you go, I am nothing compared to how massive the size of this painting is. it is just so cool, you know. And we speak with a couple of street artists, Wendy Murray, who does a lot of artwork, like street art posters, and puts them up around Sydney. She also does it in throughout America as well, New Zealand and whatever else. And we speak to her. There's someone who has taken the Eternity story, they've repackaged it, and they're using it in their world to talk about inequality for housing, pay inequality, gender inequality. It is just so cool just to see how Arthur's Eternity is being used and readapted and reshaped to influence so many other social causes. We speak with this guy called Matthew Knott, who lives in Tathra near Bega. And what he has done is they've used the word eternity, Arthur Stace's Eternity, to raise awareness about climate change, to get people to use solar panels. And you sit there and you go, man, there's no way. Like, how do you connect those dots from Arthur Stace to solar panels? And you go, if Arthur was around today writing Eternity, what message, what cause would he get behind, right? And whether he would do solar panels or talk about housing inequality, or, I don't know if Arthur would do any of that stuff. But what I do know is that Arthur's work throughout the 1900s was so massive. Like his artwork, he did it with chalk. He didn't do it with spray paint, so it was going to be permanent. He knew it was going to wash away the next downpour, or when people walked on, it was going to get trampled, disappear. He knew that was going to happen. But somewhere in all of this temporariness of Arthur writing Eternity with chalk, these people now are picking it up in our day, and they're doing it in a way that's just so permanent, and it's just lasting.
Yeah, it's a powerful message. It's a really, really powerful message. And to have it come just from one word is really incredible. And it speaks to the character of Arthur. You know, a lot of people refer to him as a petty criminal and a drunk, and I'm sure at some point his life was those things, but he obviously, inside of Arthur, was something brewing. He obviously had a very introspectful mind, I can imagine.
Well, one of the really cool things about Arthur, like Arthur was motivated by the Christian faith. And the Christian faith, when you sort of, breed into what motivated Arthur, it's all about Arthur knowing that he was loved by the God that he believed in. And so as a result of that, he then went and wrote Eternity on the Streets. And that's really what motivated Arthur. So we could water it down, we can change the message, but at the absolute core of the story, we just have to honor that that's why Arthur was doing what he was doing. And when I speak with a lot of artists now, so we've got some other docos that we want to look at as well. And I always speak to the creatives and say, why are you doing this? What's driving you? What's this thing that's inside of you that I just can never touch? I can't contain, I can't package. And for Arthur, it was that faith that he had that motivated him, that just spurred him on to keep on going. That's what it was, right? And so when we speak to someone like Matthew Knott, the solar panel guy in our film, and say, what keeps you going? He's like, the bit inside of me that keeps me going, wanting people to know about climate change and using solar panels. And the reason why he's used Eternity is because he's motivated about his grandkids. You can't package that up. You can't touch grandkids that aren't born yet, right? And so that's his motivation. So Arthur's motivation was telling people about the God that he felt was so big, that impacted him so much. You can't touch that. And that's one of the things that's so special. The people who are using Eternity now, they're motivated by something that you can't touch. So whether they believe the same things that Arthur believed or not, the motivation that Arthur used is somehow repackaged and motivating other people in different ways.
Yeah, well said. Was that mural by Days and Mystery, was that specifically for the film, or did you just catch them doing it and sort of connect that way?
I've known Mystery for about 20 years on and off.
Wow. Yeah.
And he's just a great fella, and I just love what the guy does. I think he's amazing, and I just think he's awesome. And so I really enjoyed the podcast that you did with him.
Thank you.
Now, he rang me up one day, sort of out of the blue, and said, "Hey, Richard, I'm working on this massive Eternity mural with my mate Days. Do you want to come and film it?" So, where is it? So it's in Kent Street, and he was telling me the story. So I'm like, absolutely. And so I just couldn't get my crew together. Everyone was just off doing something else. And so I ended up going and filming it. And so it wasn't specifically for the film, but I tell you, mate, I'm so glad that we've got a really good friendship with Mystery, because that has just brought about so much good stuff. And that's how we found out about it. And Days is a champion as well. He was really the brains behind it. He did the artwork for it, but watching these two guys work together, it was just amazing. It was like I was watching Picasso with this massive, it was just like a beige wall when they started, and then at the end of it, it becomes this cultural piece. It was awesome.
Yeah, it looks amazing. I haven't seen it in person, but I'm definitely going to check it out. Oh, it's still there, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's not going to go anywhere. So it's on Kent Street, not far from Town Hall train station. And, it's in permanent paint. It's, 5 meters wide and 21 meters high. So, mate, it's not going to go anywhere.
And, I guess, once the film's out, I'm assuming a lot of people will go and check it out. It's sort of hidden between two buildings. I can imagine the way that the film shot it. Is it down like an alleyway?
Yeah, there's a little alleyway. It's sort of like in this courtyard. There's a pretty good bar and cafe sort of close by, and then they do outdoor seating. And so when you're sitting outside, you see this massive eternity right next to you. It's sort of like in a little sort of courtyard. In that part of Sydney, I didn't know, but every sort of second block has got one of those courtyards, and some of them have got lovely floral arrangements. Some of them have got sort of literature and what have you. And this one has got eternity. And yeah, it's very engaging. It's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's an amazing piece. And, Mystery and Days, it's some of the best graffiti artists coming out of Sydney, or that have come out of Sydney. Incredible, incredible work. There's a fig tree that sort of plays some significance in the Arthur Stace story. Do we know exactly what fig tree at Broadway he was supposed to have walked to and have a moment, or something happened at a particular fig tree? Because I drove past there yesterday and I saw a bunch of them, and I was like, I wonder which one Arthur Stace walked to after a sermon or something like that. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, absolutely. Arthur first became a Christian in 1930. He was living on the streets or working on the streets inside Sydney, so Darlinghurst, Surrey Hills type thing, and he was living in Redfern. So he had to cross Broadway, that bit where George Street intersects with Parramatta Road in the city. And right there was the Broadway church. And there was a guy in there called Hammond, and he used to run these things called men's nights. And what he would say to anyone going past is, if you come in, we will give you a cup of tea and a rock cake. Now, there's something to eat, something to drink, right? And he used to run it in the evening. So people like Arthur Stace, generally speaking, they were hungry, they were tired, they were cold. And so this guy's just making his way home one day, and someone says to him, hey, do you want to come in, have something to eat, something to drink, but you just got to listen to the guy preach for half an hour. Anyway, so the guy does that. So Arthur walks in, and the guy who was preaching happens to be RBS Hammond, who was like a massive figure at the time, right? He was like a massive social change advocate, and looked out for a lot of people who couldn't really look out for themselves in the 1920s and 30s. Anyway, so Hammond preaches on this, on this message about God's love and what it could mean to you and how it can turn your life around. And so that night, as the story goes, Arthur has a cup of tea, eats a piece of cake, gets sort of his food and drink, what he came in for. And then he's making his way over to Redfern and crosses the park, which is now between Broadway and Sydney University, right? And in there somewhere, there's a whole bunch of Moreton Bay fig trees. One of those trees happens to be the one where Arthur Stace was going home or making his way home, falls to his knees, and is said to have dedicated his life to God there and then. And so that's where the fig tree falls into it. Now, that happened 2 years before he heard that eternity story, right? So that interaction with Hammond actually sets up Arthur to be able to then go and listen to the eternity story and go from there. But interestingly, in that, like, Hammond was a massive, massive player in the Arthur Stace story, not so much the eternity story, but the Arthur Stace story, because he's the one who took on Arthur Stace, took him under his wing and helped him work through a lot of his addictions, helped him work through a lot of his problems from his childhood that had carried on into his adult life, to the point where Hammond used to run these things called the Hammond Hotels, which was a place where men who were homeless, who were shell-shocked from World War I, could come back and have a place to sleep. They could shave, get themselves sorted before they had to go and face the day. And Arthur Stace goes from being someone who was a client in one of these Hammond Hotels to someone who ends up managing one of these Hammond Hotels, right? So it's a massive story of trust. It's a massive story of rehabilitation, of reconnection, of being in a position where you have to receive charity to then be able to then go and help give the charity to people who need it. It's a massive, it's a really cool story. And that's where that fig tree story comes into it. Arthur first gave his life to Christ, to his maker. The birth of his faith happened under that tree where Arthur, after hearing R.B.S. Hammond preach, decides to become a Christian, and it was under a fig tree in that park, as I say, which is opposite Broadway next to where Sydney University is now.
Yeah, that's amazing. I have to take a walk around that park and just walk around those trees. That's really cool.
You know what? If you do and you see a little plaque, I've not seen one, I've not been able to find it, but if there is a plaque that says, hey, this is the place where Arthur Stace fell to his knees, let us know.
I don't know if it's the right way to put it, but you've worked in conjunction with the National Film and Sound Archives for the documentary. Was that much of a relationship there? Did you sort of gain access to their archives? How was that working with them? Or was it more just an online thing where you just grabbed a bit of footage off them?
Yeah, the National Film Sound Archive are brilliant. They're the go-to people for any archival footage in Australia. And they've actually they're supporting our film, right? So they're giving us access to a whole bunch of archival footage that we can use to help set the scene of Australia in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, right up to today. And so they're just absolutely brilliant. But there's been loads of others who have come across and helped us out as well. The City of Sydney Council, they're massive. So these guys own the trademark for the eternity word, the eternity symbol. And so they were the first people to come on board and support us and say, hey, you can use the trademark, go for gold, tell the story. And then people like the Eternity Playhouse Theatre, mate, they are absolute champions for the arts, for film, for theatre, for everything. I cannot speak highly enough. The Eternity Playhouse Theatre, which is where the Burton Street Tabernacle was, which is where the Eternity Sermon, the Eternity Story all started, is now where the Eternity Playhouse Theatre is. So the Darlinghurst Theatre Company are in there, and they have just been brilliant. I think we filmed like 6 or 7 interviews in the Eternity Playhouse Theatre, and the launch event is going to be in that theatre as well.
Wow.
So I can't wait. I just can't wait for this thing to play out. And then people like the Baptist Church, right? They've opened up their archives and given us free reign to everything in their archives and said, hey, anything that you need that helps tell the backstory, if we've got it, you can have it. And it's just been brilliant. And, the Eternity Cafe at Town Hall, mate, George there, I think we filmed, again, 5 or 6 interviews there, but all of our meetings that we have in the city has been, and will continue to be at the Eternity Cafe at Town Hall. George and his team are just brilliant, and I love it. There's an Eternity plaque there. And so all these people have come along. The Oral History Association of Australia, New South Wales and Australia, they've come in and sponsored us so we can produce the oral history version of the Eternity story. And it's just brilliant. All these people have come together and just played a massive role in helping to tell the Eternity story. So, before we were talking about it's all these little moments that sort of add up to sort of tell the big Eternity story. Well, in the context of our film, it's all of these little interactions and all of these people, partners who have come on board to just help make this thing much bigger and much more powerful than it otherwise would have been.
Yeah, man. You just mentioned the oral history. So can you just break that down for me, particularly? What do they do and what do you mean by the oral history of the story?
So the Royal Australian Historical Society have supported our film, and what they would like us to do is to produce an audio version which tells the history of the Eternity story in Australia, right? And so one of the things that's going to be attached to the film itself is this oral history of the Eternity story. And so what that means is we're going to use all of the interviews that we've done, all the stuff that we couldn't fit into the documentary that hits the cutting room floor is going to exist in an online audio version that's attached to the film. So, for example, we speak with Ignatius Jones, who talks about eternity being on the Sydney Harbour Bridge in the year 2000. Now, he tells us some amazing stories and really goes behind the scenes and talks about how he went and visited a whole bunch of churches in Sydney because he wanted church bells ringing when eternity appeared on the bridge. Now, we couldn't quite fit that into the story, into the documentary in the way that I wanted to, but that story is going to live online. And you can go and listen to the entire interview with Ignatius, and for that matter, with Rick Birch and Eddie Maguire and Lyle Thompson and the guys from the Baptist Church and the guys from the Eternity Playhouse Theatre. Everyone who we interview is going to exist. Their audio is going to exist online. So the Royal Australian Historical Society have come on board, and through our partnership with them, there's going to be an audio retelling of the Eternity story that's going to exist online as well.
That adds a lot to it, I think, to have sort of both, audio, visual, and especially the extras that didn't make that, as you said, hit the cutting room floor. I'm a big sort of stickler for that type of thing. I think it's really adds to the story. And when you really want to dig in, you can watch the film and then find out a little bit extra, and you feel like you're getting a lot more, Eddie Maguire, what's his connection to the story?
Eddie Maguire hosted the Channel 9 coverage of the Millennium Fireworks.
Of course.
So for anyone who might remember watching it on Channel 9, Eddie was the guy who said, "All right, it's time for the fireworks," and they count down and off it goes. And then once it's done, he's the guy who then says, "Happy New Year, everybody," and then throws to the ad break and so on. Now, Eddie's quite an amazing storyteller. Like we know him from the Footy Show and from Channel 9 and Millionaire Hot Seat or whatever. But I've got to tell you, he tells an amazing story of what it was like to be on Sydney Harbour when it was all happening, right? So there was 4 or 5 million people all along the harbour, and there's Eddie right in the middle of it. And he had to talk about this thing on TV in Australia and also around the world. So while he was on TV doing stuff for Australia, he was also, on throughout Europe, throughout America, throughout Asia, doing live crosses, telling the world what it was like to be on Sydney Harbour on Millennium Night as Eternity was appearing on the bridge. So that's where Eddie fits into it.
Yeah. That's that is a pretty it's a special place to be, isn't it? Right in the middle of it, in that year 1999 to 2000, while the Eternity is beaming off the bridge. That's incredible. Can you tell me when do you think the film will be released, and what type of things are you doing for the release? Is it going to be available online, or what have you formulated a plan for how it's going to sort of get out to the public?
Yeah, the film, which at the moment we're calling it the Eternity film, it's going to have a different name. We've got a few names on our whiteboard that we're playing around with, but for now we're calling it the Eternity film. That's going to be released around March, April this year, and so it'll come out with a bang. So we're going to start off by having a massive launch event at the Eternity Playhouse Theatre and a couple of exclusive screenings. Right, so there'll be a couple of screenings that. There's only going to be 100 tickets available for the first exclusive screenings and so on. And then we'll then see what comes, right? So we're speaking to a couple of TV channels, a couple of online platforms at the moment. Our main goal for this is, it would be nice to get on TV, but our main goal is to get people to reignite with the word, to reconnect with Eternity, reconnect with the story and everything that it means, the passion of what this story means to Sydney and to Australia and to a whole bunch of people out there. That's our goal for what we're going to do. But it'll start off at the Eternity Playhouse Theatre. It should end up on one of the main TV channels, on one of the main streaming platforms. And then there'll also be an education component. So kids will learn about this as part of a slice of Australian history in school and a bunch of other things.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's really good to hear. Fascinating. I don't know if this is the right question for you, and if you don't have to answer it by any means, but what advice would you give to a sort of a young aspiring filmmaker or someone who's looking to begin a career in film and television?
Yeah, for anyone, I speak with a lot of people who want to get involved in film and television, and the best piece of advice that I can give to anyone is similar to the best piece of advice that was given to me, which was find your passion and follow it, right? And so I used to worry about making sure I met the right people, I knew all the right technical staff, I had the right friends, all that stuff. But there was this guy who's just got one of the best careers of television and media in Australia. And his advice to me was, if you're passionate about telling factual stories, if you're passionate about telling stories about Australia and Australian history, then just go and do it. If you've got a handycam, if you've got a phone, if it's vision, if it's audio, if it's writing it down on paper, just start. Start igniting your passion, follow your passion, and it will open doors for you. And that's the best advice that I can give. If anybody would like to catch up for a coffee, I'm all ears. I'd love to have a chat and encourage people on their journey. But the biggest advice that I could say is find your passion, because that's what's going to make you different to the next person, and then start exercising your passion. Start telling the stories that you want to tell.
It's beautiful, man. Thank you very much for that. The film at the moment, have you wrapped filming? Is it in the editing room? Can you even talk about that type of thing? Is it completely finished? Where is it at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. The Eternity filming is done. We're in the edit suite. We're in the final stages of finishing the edit now. And very soon we'll be off to color grade and audio post, and then we'll be ready for the big release. So the website is eternityfilm.com.au, and from there you can join the mailing list and keep up to date as to all the things we're doing. But right at the minute, we're in the final stages of editing, and it's looking pretty amazing. It's awesome. I mean, I watch this thing; it feels like a new documentary each time I watch it.
Beautiful, yeah, awesome. And do you rely on public support at Australian TV and at the Australian TV Media Group at all? Is there any way that anyone listening to this can learn more about you or support what you're doing and your storytelling?
The Eternity film is a project that's pretty special to us. We've got a partnership with an education organisation. So if anybody would like to support the film, get on board, you can jump on our website and click on the Support Eternity page. And then there's an opportunity to chip in a few dollars if you'd like to, or join the mailing list just to know what's coming up. But yeah, I mean, through the Australian TV and Media Group, we work on a range of different stories. And some of the stories lend themselves to being able to offer tax-deductible receipts for our projects. Some of them are just straight commercial, where we just go and do a commercial deal. The Eternity documentary, or the Eternity film, that's a unique one where, because it lends itself to Australian history, we're able to encourage or invite people to get on board and help us to tell the story. So eternityfilm.com.au is where you can find out about all of the stories, all the people who we've spoken to, all the interview guests, and some of our plans that we plan on doing when we launch and also beyond the launch. So the 14th of November, for example, is the first day Eternity was ever written. We're going to start calling that Eternity Day. And so on the 14th of November, Eternity Day is just going to be something that we're going to refer to. Information about that's on our website. And if you would like to support the Eternity film, you can. Also, if you've got an Eternity story, if you interacted with it, you might remember seen it somewhere, or you know of an artist who's using it now or whatever, there is a link on our website where you can go there, click on your Eternity story, and just tell us your Eternity story. We'd love to hear it.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think that should be a nationally recognised day, I think, 14th of November. Maybe the film will push towards that being recognised.
It'd be pretty cool. It'd be cool if it happened.
It would be. Well, Richard, first of all, man, I want to thank you for your time today. It was just a pleasure to talk to you and to hear about you and your history and your what you're doing in film and television, but also to hear about what you're doing with the documentary that's coming out this year. I think it's really important. It's such a fascinating and powerful story, and it's one that's not yet complete, which is kind of, unironically, Eternity does in fact live on forever, and it seems like it's just continuing to evolve. It's really beautiful. So much respect, and all the best to you and your family. I can't wait for the film to come out.
Thank you for listening to the Lead Poison Podcast.
talking to me? Oh yeah? Huh? Okay.
Huh?